For a fraction of a second, an event occurred that was so statistically improbable it might as well have been impossible. A single rogue micrometeorite, no larger than a grain of sand and traveling at near relativistic speed, happened to intersect the plasma beam's path at the exact nanosecond of its discharge. The impact, though minuscule, was enough to create a momentary instability in the plasma's magnetic containment field. The beam didn't just miss. It blossomed outwards, its energy dissipating harmlessly into the upper atmosphere, creating a brilliant, aurora-like display in the sky. On the bridge of the inevitable logic, there was a stunned silence. The ship's targeting computer ran a diagnostic, its internal logic struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The probability of such an intersection was a number so small it required dozens of zeros after the decimal point. It was, for all intents and purposes, 0. "Report," the Cathar captain demanded. "Cannon discharge!" "Failed, Captain," the weapons officer stammered. "External impact from a stray particle. The odds. They are astronomical." Aboard the immutable truth, Lyra's console chirped again. "Grand Marshal," she said, her synthesized voice holding a new, strange tone. At the exact moment of the weapon's misfire, the planet's anomalous energy signature spiked to unprecedented levels. "The correlation is statistically significant." Zorik finally turned his gaze from the view screen to Lyra. "Correlation does not equal causation, Sub-Marshal. It was a fluke. A 1 in a trillion chance. The universe is full of them. It changes nothing. Order the squadron to fire again." But as the order was given, another Cathar destroyer, targeting a hidden naval base in the Pacific, suddenly lost power. Not from an attack, but from a cascade of spontaneous, simultaneous circuit failures in its primary power conduit. Another ship, moving to bombard a European command center, found its navigation system suddenly believing it was in the center of a star. Its sensors flooded with impossible data. One by one, small, statistically impossible glitches began to plague the Cathar fleet. A shield emitter that failed its diagnostic for the first time in 1,000 cycles. A targeting lock that inexplicably drifted by a few millimeters, causing a shot to miss by miles. A communication channel that filled with static at a crucial moment. Each event on its own was a minor anomaly, a fluke. But together they formed a pattern of impossibly bad luck. In the Cheyenne Mountain bunker, Colonel Thorne stared at the tactical display, his mouth agape. "General, what is happening?" "Their first wave? It's in disarray. Misfires, equipment failures. They're acting like a cursed fleet." Eva Rostova allowed herself a small, grim smile. "It's not a curse, Colonel. It's a whisper. We're whispering into the universe, and the universe is starting to whisper back. The Cathar came to our world to solve an equation. They're about to find out that humanity is the one variable that can never be solved. The Galactic fleet had come to erase humanity, but in their arrogant certainty, they had failed to see the truth. They weren't just attacking a planet. They were attacking a fundamental force of nature, a living, breathing nexus of consciousness. They had awoken something older than their empire, older than their logic, older than time itself. And it was just getting started. Part 2. The initial chaos among the Cathar fleet was quickly suppressed by their rigid discipline. Grand Marshal Zorik, attributing the rash of impossible failures to a combination of unforeseen environmental factors and human electronic warfare, ordered a systematic recalibration of all systems. The Cathar were beings of logic. If a problem arose, it was simply a new equation to be solved. They ran diagnostics, purged their systems, and strengthened their firewalls against any potential intrusion. They were confident that this was a temporary setback, a minor complication in an otherwise straightforward conquest. "The humans are more resourceful than our initial assessment predicted," Zorik stated flatly in a fleet-wide address. "They are employing some form of sophisticated probability-based electronic warfare. It is a clever, if primitive, tactic. Our logic will overcome it. We will adapt. We will analyze. We will prevail." He ordered the second wave of attacks, but this time with a different approach. Instead of surgical strikes from orbit, he commanded a full-scale ground invasion. He would land his legions of chrome-plated insectoid warriors, the Screeth, onto the planet's surface. He would take the fight to the humans directly, where their orbital tricks would be less effective. The ground war, his strategists calculated, would be swift and brutal. Human ground forces were disorganized and technologically inferior. The probability of a successful planetary pacification within 3 standard cycles was 98.2%. As massive Cathar troop carriers descended through the atmosphere, their undersides glowing cherry red from the friction, a new phase of the strange war began. These carriers were shielded against conventional weapons, and their descent was a terrifying spectacle for the humans watching from their hidden positions. They landed in key strategic locations across the globe, their ramps lowering to disgorge thousands upon thousands of Skrith warriors. These creatures were a nightmare of chittering mandibles and razor-sharp limbs, armed with pulse rifles that could flay a man to the bone in a single shot. On the ground, the human resistance fought with a courage born of desperation. Soldiers in worn-out combat gear used guerrilla tactics, laying ambushes in shattered cities and dense jungles. But for every Skrith warrior they took down, 10 more seemed to take its place. The Cathar war machine was relentless, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Yet the glitches continued, becoming stranger and more localized. A squadron of Skrith, advancing through the ruins of what was once Paris, suddenly found their footing giving way. An entire city block, which their geological scans had assured them was solid bedrock, collapsed into a previously undetected sinkhole, swallowing the entire unit. In the Amazon, a Cathar patrol, using advanced thermal imaging to track a human resistance cell, found their sensors overwhelmed by the sudden, inexplicable appearance of thousands of heat signatures. When they investigated, they found nothing but a swarm of perfectly ordinary butterflies, their collective body heat having somehow mimicked the signal of a small army. In a desolate desert, a Cathar forward operating base was established, complete with prefabricated structures and a powerful energy shield. The location had been chosen for its stability. No seismic activity had been recorded in the region for over 1,000 years. On the 3rd day of their operation, a localized freak earthquake, measuring a staggering 8.9 on the Richter scale, erupted directly beneath the base, shaking it to pieces. Seismologists in the human bunkers watched their instruments in disbelief. The tremor had no epicenter, no tectonic origin. It simply happened. On the bridge of the immutable truth, Submarshal Lyra was becoming obsessed with the anomalous data. She had dedicated her entire processing power to analyzing the strange coincidences, the impossible events that seemed to plague their invasion. She ignored Zorek's dismissive claims of electronic warfare. This was something else. It was too subtle, too varied, too natural. It was as if the planet itself, and the very laws of physics that governed it, were actively resisting them. She created a new, complex algorithm, one that correlated the timing and location of every single improbability event with the live readings from Project Chorus. The pattern that emerged was undeniable and terrifying. The spikes in the human consciousness field were not just correlated with the Cathar's bad luck. They were a direct precursor. A surge of focused human emotion in a specific region would be followed, moments later, by a statistically impossible event in that same region. A collective prayer from a group of refugees hiding in a cathedral in Rome was followed by a sudden, inexplicable downpour that shorted out the electrical systems of the Skrith unit hunting them. A wave of defiant anger from a platoon of soldiers pinned down in Shanghai was followed by a Cathar walker's main leg joint spontaneously shearing off due to a case of metal fatigue that should have taken centuries to develop. Lyra took her findings to Zorek, her bronze exoskeleton seeming to hum with a nervous energy. She projected her data onto the main holographic display, a complex 3-dimensional map of the planet, showing the pulsating gold of Project Chorus and the flaring red dots of the improbable events. "Grand Marshal," she began, her synthesized voice carefully neutral, "I have concluded my analysis. The humans are not using electronic warfare. The phenomenon we are witnessing is not technological in nature." Zorek turned to face her, his featureless mask unreadable. "Explain, the humans. They appear to be able to consciously influence probability," Lyra stated, the words sounding like heresy even to her own auditory sensors. Their collective emotional state is creating localized pockets of acausal phenomena. They are not breaking the laws of physics. They are bending them. They are willing unlikely events into existence. The more intense their emotional focus, the more improbable the event they can manifest. For a long moment, the only sound on the bridge was the quiet hum of the ship's life support. Zorek's obsidian form was perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously low. Submarshal Lyra, what you are suggesting is not logic. It is mysticism. It is the primitive belief that wishing can make it so. You are suggesting that the universe bends to the will of emotionally unstable primitives. This is an insult to the Cathar Imperium and to the very principles of mathematical certainty upon which we are built. The data is conclusive, Grand Marshal, Lyra insisted, standing her ground. The correlation is a mathematical certainty. To ignore it is illogical. You are compromised, Zorek declared, his voice rising in volume. Your proximity to this chaotic species has contaminated your reasoning. The failures are due to a complex, layered technological attack that we have not yet deciphered. That is the only logical conclusion. You are relieved of your analytical duties. Confine yourself to your quarters until your logic circuits can be purged and recalibrated. Lyra's shoulders slumped, a very un-Cathar-like gesture of defeat. She had presented a logical conclusion based on undeniable evidence, and Zorek had rejected it because it did not fit his worldview. He was the one who was compromised, blinded by his own dogmatic adherence to a rigid, incomplete understanding of the universe. As she was escorted from the bridge, she cast one last look at the golden glow of Earth on the view screen. She knew with a certainty that transcended mathematics that Zorek's refusal to accept the truth would be his undoing. Meanwhile, in the human command bunker, General Rostova and her team were beginning to understand the true nature of their power. They weren't just causing random glitches anymore. They were learning to direct the storm. The initial theory was that Project Chorus would act as a deterrent. A subtle field of bad luck, one of her lead scientists, Dr. Eris Thorne, explained, his eyes wide with a manic excitement. But it's more than that. It's an interactive force, the feedback we're getting from the planet, from reality itself. It's like we've tapped into the universe's operating system, and we're starting to figure out the commands. They began to conduct experiments. They asked a group of people in a secure bunker in Australia to focus on the concept of growth. Miles away, in the Australian outback where a Cathar legion was advancing, a field of native, super-resilient vines began to grow at an impossible rate, their tendrils as thick as steel cables, ensnaring the Cathar walkers and pulling them to the ground. They asked another group, former pilots and astronauts in a base in Houston, to focus on the concept of flight and freedom. High above, a squadron of human fighter jets, hopelessly outmatched against the Cathar interceptors, suddenly found their engines running with impossible efficiency. They dodged and weaved with a grace that defied their design specifications as Cathar targeting systems failed and their missiles inexplicably flew wide. A human pilot would later report that it felt as if the wind itself was on their side, lifting their wings and guiding their hands. The Cathar ground invasion, which was supposed to be a swift and brutal affair, bogged down into a nightmarish slog. Their warriors were not just fighting human soldiers. They were fighting the planet itself. Rivers would change course to flood their encampments. Rock slides would occur on perfectly stable mountainsides to block their advance. Swarms of normally harmless insects would become inexplicably aggressive, their bites causing severe allergic reactions in the Skryth warriors' alien biology. Zorek grew more and more enraged. From his sterile perch on the immutable truth, he watched his perfect logical invasion crumble into chaos. He refused to accept Lyra's theory, instead doubling down on his belief in a technological cause. He saw the humans' success not as a sign of their unique power, but as a sign of his own failure to find the off switch for their weapon. They have a central broadcast point, he seethed to his new command staff. All of this chaos is being directed. Find the source of Project Chorus. Find their General Rostova. Level the entire mountain she hides under. If we cut off the head, the body will wither. Logic dictates that this is the only path to victory. He deployed his elite hunter-killer units, the Silent Blades, with a single objective: locate and destroy the Cheyenne Mountain complex. These were the best trackers and infiltrators in the Imperium, equipped with stealth technology and quantum sensors that could detect a human heartbeat through a mile of solid rock. But as the Silent Blades began their hunt, General Rostova was preparing her next move. "They're getting desperate, Marcus," she said to Colonel Thorne. "They're coming for us now. They think if they can silence me, they can silence humanity. It's time to show them how deeply they've miscalculated. It's time to turn our whisper into a roar." She looked at the golden pulsating globe on her screen. "Dr. Thorne, I want you to prepare the Odyssey and find me its bravest pilot." The conflict was about to escalate, moving from a war of improbable accidents to a war of impossible miracles. The hunt for the source of Project Chorus became the singular obsession of the Cathar forces. Grand Marshal Zorik, convinced that he was fighting a sophisticated technological weapon, poured all available resources into locating the command bunker of General Eva Rostova. His Silent Blades, ghost-like figures cloaked in personal stealth fields, moved across the ravaged landscape of North America, their advanced sensors scanning, probing, and analyzing every inch of the Rocky Mountains. They were methodical, relentless, and utterly confident in their superiority. In the Cheyenne Mountain complex, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of dread and defiant resolve. They knew the hunters were coming. Their own sensors picked up the faint, fleeting energy signatures of the Cathar stealth fields, like ripples in a pond announcing the presence of a predator. "They're closing in." "General," Colonel Thorne reported, his face grim. The tactical map showed a dozen converging vectors, all aimed directly at their location. "Their sensors are too good. They'll pinpoint our exact position within the next 12 hours. Eva Rostova nodded, her gaze steady. 12 hours is more than we need." She turned to a different screen, which showed a live feed from a hidden hangar bay deep within the mountain. There, bathed in the stark glow of work lights, sat a small, unassuming starship. It was an older model, a diplomatic courier vessel named the Odyssey. It was designed for speed and discretion, not for combat. It had no weapons to speak of, and its shields were paper-thin compared to a military-grade vessel. But it had been modified. Its entire cargo hold had been ripped out and replaced with a massive experimental device, a mobile chorus amplifier. It was a scaled-down, concentrated version of the planetary network, designed to turn the ship itself into a focal point for humanity's collective will. Standing before the ship was a young woman, Captain Eva's own granddaughter, Anya Sharma. Anya had her grandmother's eyes, sharp and intelligent, but they held the fire and passion of youth. She was one of Earth's best pilots, known for her nerves of steel and an almost intuitive connection with her ship. "Anya, is the Odyssey ready?" General Rostova asked over the comm. "She's purring like a kitten, Grandma," Anya's voice came back, laced with a confidence that belied the suicidal nature of her mission. "The mobile amplifier is integrated and stable. We're ready to give the Cathar a little surprise." The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. The Odyssey was not meant to fight the Cathar fleet. It was meant to be a distraction, a lightning rod. Anya was to fly the ship directly out of the mountain and straight towards the Cathar flagship, the immutable truth. Her goal was to draw the entire fleet's attention, to become the undeniable source of the improbability field. While the Cathar were focused on her small, seemingly insignificant ship, human resistance cells across the globe would carry out a series of coordinated strikes against the bogged-down Cathar ground forces. It was a classic feint, but one supercharged with the impossible power of Project Chorus. "They think our power is tied to this mountain," Eva explained to her command staff. "We're going to let them believe that. We're going to give them a target so loud and bright they won't be able to look away. Anya will be the tip of the spear, and every soul on this planet will be the force behind her." A global broadcast went out once more, but this time, the message was different. It wasn't just a general call for hope and defiance. It was a specific instruction: General Rostova asked everyone to focus their thoughts, their will, their very being on the Odyssey and its lone pilot. She asked them to pour all their collective energy into that one tiny ship, to make it a vessel not of metal and wires but of pure, unadulterated human spirit. As the Cathar silent blades began their final approach, huge blast doors, hidden beneath tons of rock and camouflage, ground open on the side of Cheyenne Mountain. The Odyssey, its engines glowing a brilliant blue, shot out into the dawn sky like an arrow released from a bow, aboard the immutable Truth. The sudden appearance of the ship sent alarms blaring across the bridge. "Unidentified vessel launched from the target coordinates," an officer shouted. It's a civilian courier. No weapons, minimal shielding." Zorik stepped forward, his featureless faceplate fixed on the image of the tiny ship ascending rapidly towards them. "A last act of desperate, illogical defiance," he sneered. "They send a lamb to the slaughter. Target the vessel. Obliterate it." But as the Cathar fleet's targeting systems locked onto the Odyssey, something strange happened. Sub-Marshal Lyra, who had been monitoring events from her confinement, saw it on her personal datapad. The golden energy signature of Project Chorus, which had been a diffuse glow around the planet, suddenly contracted, coalesced, and flowed into the tiny ship. The Odyssey began to shine, not with the light of its engines, but with an ethereal golden aura. "Grand Marshal," the weapons officer on the bridge cried out in alarm. "The energy readings from that ship are off the scale. It's radiating the same anomalous frequency as the planet, but amplified 1,000 times. "Fire!" Zorik commanded, a hint of urgency in his synthesized voice. Dozens of Cathar warships fired simultaneously. A web of brilliant energy beams converged on the Odyssey. It was enough firepower to vaporize a battleship. But as the beams neared the small ship, they began to bend, to warp, as if passing through a tremendous gravitational lens. The aural glow around the Odyssey seemed to ripple, and the deadly energy beams slid past it, missing completely and streaking harmlessly into the blackness of space. A stunned silence fell over the Cathar bridge. They had just witnessed the impossible. Anya Sharma, in the cockpit of the Odyssey, gritted her teeth, her hands tight on the controls. She wasn't just flying a ship. She was wrestling with a hurricane of pure emotion. She could feel the hopes and fears of billions of people flowing through her, through the very hull of her ship. It was exhilarating and terrifying. "Okay, you bastards," she whispered, a fierce grin on her face. "Let's dance." She pushed the throttle forward, and the Odyssey surged towards the Cathar fleet. What followed was not a battle, but a performance, a cosmic ballet of impossibility. Cathar fighters swarmed the small ship, launching waves of missiles. The missiles would either prematurely detonate, lose their tracking lock at the last second, or in one truly baffling case, turn around and fly back towards the ship that had launched them. Anya weaved the Odyssey through the enemy fleet with an impossible grace. She flew so close to a Cathar cruiser that its crew could have seen her through their viewports. The cruiser's point defense cannons, which could track and destroy targets moving at incredible speeds, fired wildly, every single shot missing. It was as if the Odyssey existed in a pocket of reality where the laws of probability had been suspended in its favor. Zorik watched, his logical mind struggling to process the scene. This was not technology. This was not a trick. The data streaming onto his console was clear. His fleet, a monument to mathematical perfection, was being held at bay by a single unarmed ship powered by something he could not comprehend. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "They are willing unlikely events into existence." He felt a cold, alien sensation creep into his consciousness for the first time in his long life. Doubt. The audacity of the human tactic was breathtaking. While their most powerful weapon was leading the entire Cathar fleet on a wild goose chase in orbit, human forces on the ground launched their counteroffensive. With the bulk of the Cathar's attention focused on the Odyssey, the improbability field on the surface seemed to weaken, but in its place was pure, simple human courage. Resistance fighters emerged from their hiding places, launching coordinated attacks on Cathar supply lines, command posts, and patrols. The Cathar ground forces, already demoralized by the planet's strange hostility, were caught completely by surprise. The hunters had become the hunted. Aboard the Odyssey, Anya was pushing herself and her ship to the limit. The strain of channeling so much psychic energy was immense. The ship's hull groaned, and the golden aura around it flickered. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Her mission wasn't to defeat the fleet. It was to buy time and to prove a point. "Grandma," she broadcast on a secure channel, her voice strained. "I think they're getting the message. But they're starting to adapt. They're firing wider energy fields, trying to disrupt the resonance." "We see it, Anya." General Rostova's voice came back, filled with a mixture of pride and fear. "You've done more than we could have ever hoped. Your courage has shocked them to their core. Bring the Odyssey home." But as Anya tried to disengage, she found her path blocked. Zorik, in a fit of cold fury, had ordered his ships to form a contracting sphere of fire around her, a net of energy from which there could be no escape. He was no longer trying to hit her with precision. He was trying to boil the space she occupied. "Grand Marshal, the vessel cannot escape," an officer reported. "We are contracting the energy field. Whatever trick it is using, it cannot withstand this much raw power." Zorik watched the golden speck of the Odyssey trapped in his closing net. A grim sense of satisfaction began to settle over him. He would capture this vessel. He would tear it apart, analyze its systems, and discover the logical, technological secret behind this human magic. He would prove that his worldview was correct, that mathematics was still the ultimate power in the universe. He would dissect this human courage and find the machine that powered it, but he had made one final, fatal miscalculation. He assumed the humans' greatest strength was their ability to bend reality. He failed to understand that their true power, the one that truly defined them, was their capacity for sacrifice. And Anya Sharma, trapped in a cage of fire, was about to make the ultimate sacrifice to prove it. Trapped within the tightening web of Cathar energy, the Odyssey bucked and shuddered. The golden aura that protected it sputtered violently, the focused will of 7 billion people struggling against a tidal wave of raw, destructive power. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed and consoles sparked. Anya Sharma fought to keep the ship stable, her knuckles white on the controls, sweat beading on her forehead. She could feel the pressure not just on the ship's hull but on her own mind. The psychic weight of an entire species' hope was a heavy burden to bear. "Grandma, I can't break through," she reported, her voice tight with strain. "They've got me boxed in. The amplifier is starting to overload." In the Cheyenne Mountain bunker, a heavy silence fell over the command staff as they watched the tactical display. The tiny icon representing the Odyssey was surrounded by a wall of hostile red symbols. The lifeblood of their strategy, the lightning rod for their impossible power, was about to be extinguished. "Get her out of there, Ava," Colonel Thorne urged, his voice low and desperate. General Rostova stared at the screen, her heart aching, but her mind was racing, calculating, searching for an option that wasn't there. She knew what Anya knew. There was no escape. The Cathar were too determined, their trap too perfect. But in that moment of despair, a new, terrible, and brilliant idea began to form. It was a gamble of such magnitude that it could either save humanity or shatter it completely. "Anya," she said, her voice impossibly calm over the calm. "Listen to me very carefully. The mobile amplifier, what would happen if you were to deliberately overload its core?" There was a moment of silence from the Odyssey's cockpit. Then Anya's voice came back, quiet, knowing. The schematic said it would create a feedback loop with the main chorus network, a massive, uncontrolled surge of causal energy. It wouldn't be a weapon, Grandma. It would be a shout, a psychic scream that would resonate on a quantum level. The effects would be unpredictable. "Unpredictable is our only weapon left," Ava replied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She was asking her own granddaughter to become a martyr, to sacrifice herself not in an explosion of fire, but in a blast of pure consciousness. Anya took a deep, shaky breath. She looked out of her cockpit view screen at the magnificent, swirling blue and white orb of Earth below. She saw the home she was fighting for, the people she was dying for. "Tell everyone to hold on tight," she said, a sad smile in her voice. "And tell Mom and Dad I love them." "We all love you, Anya," Eva whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her weathered cheek. "You have saved us all." On the bridge of the immutable truth, Grand Marshal Zorik watched his trap close. "The target's energy field is collapsing," his weapons officer reported. "Shield integrity at 12%. We will have the vessel intact within moments." Zorik felt a surge of triumph. He had cornered the ghost. He had trapped the miracle. Logic was about to be reasserted. "Prepare a tractor beam. I want that ship brought directly to our main hangar. I will have its secrets." Anya Sharma closed her eyes. She reached forward and keyed a final sequence into her console, overriding all the safeties on the mobile chorus amplifier. Then she opened her mind. She didn't just channel the collective will of humanity. She became it. She let go of her own fear, her own identity, and embraced the full roaring torrent of 7 billion souls. The love, the rage, the grief, the hope, it all surged into the amplifier's core. The golden aura around the Odyssey did not just flicker and die. It exploded. It expanded in a silent, blinding flash of pure golden light. There was no sound, no shockwave in the traditional sense. It was a shockwave of reality itself. On the Cathar Bridge, every screen went white. Every sensor overloaded, but this was not a technological failure. The wave of energy that washed over the Cathar fleet was not physical. It was metaphysical. It was the raw, unfiltered consciousness of an entire species, unleashed in a single devastating wave. For the Cathar, beings of pure, cold logic, the experience was shattering. It was as if the universe had suddenly gained a soul, and that soul was screaming directly into their minds. They didn't just see the light. They experienced it. They felt every ounce of human emotion that had been poured into that final, sacrificial act. Grand Marshal Zorik was thrown back from his command chair, not by a physical force, but by the sheer psychic impact. His mind, a fortress of mathematical certainty, was breached and flooded. He experienced a whirlwind of alien concepts. He felt the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. He felt the selfless courage of a soldier giving his life for a comrade. He felt the quiet joy of an artist creating something beautiful. He felt the deep, gut-wrenching grief of loss, the soaring elation of triumph, the quiet peace of a sunset. These were the inefficiencies he had so disdained, but now they washed over him with the force of a supernova, tearing his rigid worldview to shreds. And then came the twist. The massive surge of causal energy, the shout that Anya had unleashed, did more than just stun the Cathar. It tore a tiny momentary hole in the fabric of space-time. And through that hole, for a single terrifying instant, something looked back. It was not a being, not a creature. It was the universe itself, the raw, fundamental consciousness that underpinned all of existence. The something older than time that humanity had awoken was not a weapon or an entity sleeping in the Earth's core. It was the very nature of reality, a reality that humanity, with its chaotic, emotional consciousness, had a unique and powerful connection to. The Cathar fleet, and Zorik most of all, were granted a terrible, beautiful vision. They saw the birth of the cosmos, not as a sterile equation of physics, but as a vibrant, conscious act of creation. They saw the intricate web of causality that linked every atom, every star, every thought in the universe. They saw their own place in it, not as masters or correctors, but as a tiny, fleeting part of an infinite, unknowable whole. And they saw humanity, this messy, illogical, emotional species, not as a flaw, but as a vital, necessary component of that whole. They saw that human consciousness, with its capacity for love and sacrifice, was a rare and precious catalyst, a spark that could touch the face of creation itself. The vision lasted only a microsecond, but for the Cathar, it was an eternity. When it faded, the golden light was gone. The Odyssey was gone. There was only the blackness of space and a profound, ringing silence. The Cathar fleet was adrift. The ships were undamaged, but the minds of their crews were broken. Most were left in a catatonic state, their logic circuits permanently fused by an experience their minds were never designed to comprehend. Grand Marshal Zorik lay on the floor of his bridge, his obsidian exoskeleton trembling. The featureless mask of his face now seemed to convey an emotion he had never known, absolute soul-shattering awe. The equation he had dedicated his life to solving had been shown to him in its entirety, and he had discovered he was nothing but a rounding error. His arrogance, his empire, his entire philosophy of existence had been rendered utterly and completely meaningless. Only a few Cathar, those with a greater mental flexibility or a more peripheral exposure to the blast, retained their sanity. Among them was Sub-Marshal Lyra. From her quarters, she had felt the wave, but at a distance. It had not broken her. It had enlightened her. She finally understood. The data she had collected, the impossible theory she had proposed, it was all true, but it was only a shadow of the profound reality. Humanity was not bending the laws of physics. They were in harmony with them in a way the Cathar had never dreamed possible. Lyra rose to her feet, her bronze form steady. She made her way to the bridge, stepping over the catatonic forms of her former crewmates. She looked at the pathetic, trembling figure of Zorik, a being who had been the master of his reality and was now a prisoner of a greater one. With a quiet determination, she stepped up to the command console. The fleet was in disarray, its leadership shattered. A new logic was needed. A new equation had to be written. She opened a communication channel, not to the remnants of the Cathar Empire, but to a small hidden bunker on the blue-green world that had just changed the galaxy forever. The war was over. The climax had not been a battle of ships, but a collision of souls. And in the silent aftermath, a new conversation was about to begin. Part 5. The silence in the aftermath of the Odyssey's sacrifice was profound, stretching from the drifting, silent fleet of the Cathar to the stunned command bunker deep within Cheyenne Mountain. On the main tactical display, the angry red icons of the enemy ships were still there, but they were grayed out, motionless, their energy signatures reduced to bare life support. The overwhelming threat had been neutralized, not by a weapon, but by a revelation. General Eva Rostova stood before the screen, her face a mask of grief and victory. The cost had been immeasurable. She had lost her granddaughter, and humanity had lost a hero. But in that single selfless act, Anya Sharma had saved them all. The weight of that reality was crushing, yet uplifting. Colonel Thorne gently placed a hand on her shoulder. No words were needed. Everyone in the room understood the depth of the sacrifice and the magnitude of the miracle they had just witnessed. Then a new alert chimed on the communications console. A single low-power signal originating from the Cathar flagship, the immutable truth. It was a standard diplomatic channel, a frequency they hadn't used once during their brutal invasion. "It's them," the comms officer said, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're hailing us." Eva straightened up, pushing her grief down into a locked compartment in her soul. There would be time for mourning later. Now she had to be a general. "On screen," she commanded. The face that appeared was not the cold, imposing form of Grand Marshal Zorik. It was the smaller, bronze-sheened figure of Sub-Marshal Lyra. Her featureless face was, as always, impossible to read, but her posture was different. The rigid, arrogant bearing of the Cathar was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "This is Sub-Marshal Lyra of the Cathar Imperium," she began, her synthesized voice softer than before, stripped of its harsh, authoritative edge. "I am speaking on behalf of the remnants of this fleet. Grand Marshal Zorik is incapacitated." "I am General Eva Rostova," Eva replied, her voice steady and strong. "What is the status of your forces, Sub-Marshal?" "Our forces are silent," Lyra said, the word choice deliberate. "The event, the sacrifice of your pilot, it did more than disable our ships. It educated us in a way that we could not have conceived. We were shown a truth that our logic could not encompass." She paused, as if struggling to find the right words in her own rigid language. "We came here to solve an equation. We believed you were a messy variable that needed to be eliminated. We were wrong. You are not a variable. You are a fundamental constant, a force we did not know existed." The conversation that followed was unlike any first contact in recorded history. It was not a negotiation of surrender terms or a declaration of victory. It was a philosophical debriefing. Lyra described, in her precise analytical terms, the vision the Cathar had experienced. She spoke of the wave of human emotion, of the glimpse into the conscious heart of the universe, and of the shattering realization of their own cosmic insignificance. "Your capacity for sacrifice," Lyra explained. "This illogical act of giving up the self for the whole, it is not a weakness, it is a key. It unlocked something. It showed us that the universe is not just a mechanism to be understood, but a story to be experienced. And your people, with your chaotic emotions, are its most powerful storytellers." As Lyra spoke, Eva Rostova began to understand the true scope of what had happened. They hadn't just defeated an enemy fleet. They had converted them. They had forced a civilization built on cold, hard mathematics to confront the profound, unquantifiable mystery of existence. Anya's shout had not been a scream of rage, but a song of the human soul, and the Cathar had been forced to listen to every note. In the days and weeks that followed, a strange new reality took hold. The Cathar fleet did not retreat. They remained in orbit, a silent testament to the events that had transpired. Under Lyra's command, they began to assist in the relief efforts on Earth. Their advanced medical technology was used to treat the wounded. Their fabrication units were used to create shelters for the displaced. Their powerful sensors, once used to target cities, were now used to locate survivors trapped in the rubble. The Screeth warriors on the ground, those who had not been driven insane by the psychic blast, were recalled. They moved with a new hesitant slowness, their metallic bodies seeming less like weapons and more like the shells of lost and confused beings. Human soldiers, who had been fighting them for their very lives just days before, watched in stunned silence as their former enemies began to help clear debris and distribute aid. The hatred and fear were still there, but they were now mixed with a profound sense of bewilderment. Lyra became a reluctant ambassador. She spent hours in communication with General Rostova and Dr. Eris Thorne, trying to build a bridge of understanding between their two vastly different cultures. She explained the Cathar worldview, their 10,000-year quest for logical perfection, their belief that emotion was a plague to be cured. And in return, the humans tried to explain the unexplainable, the beauty of a sunset, the comfort of a sad song, the fierce, illogical love for a child. "We sought to bring order to the chaos," Lyra admitted during one session. "But we failed to see that the chaos is where life truly exists. It is the soil from which art and courage and love grow. We have spent millennia pruning a garden we did not understand, trying to make every plant grow in a straight line. Without realizing, we were killing all the flowers. The emotional resolution for humanity was slow and painful. The planet was scarred and the losses were catastrophic. Memorials were built, not just for the soldiers who had fallen, but for the civilians who had been lost in the initial, brutal attacks. And at the heart of the largest memorial, a simple, elegant statue of the Odyssey was erected, pointing towards the stars. Below it, a single name was engraved: Anya Sharma. She was a symbol of humanity's greatest sorrow and its most profound triumph. For the Cathar, the resolution was a complete and total reformation of their civilization. The news of what had happened at Sol 3 spread through the Imperium, carried by Lyra's detailed and honest reports. It was a shock that sent their rigid, logical society into a tailspin. Some factions refused to believe it, calling it heresy. Others embraced it, seeing it as a long-awaited awakening. The Cathar Imperium, the unshakable monolith that had dominated the galaxy, began to fracture not in a violent civil war, but in a quiet, soul-searching schism. They had found the answer to their ultimate equation, and the answer was that they had been asking the wrong question all along. Months later, Lyra stood with General Rostova on the observation deck of a newly built space station orbiting Earth. They looked down at the planet, which was already showing remarkable signs of healing, its green and blue vibrancy returning. The remnants of the Cathar fleet were preparing for their long journey home, not as conquerors, but as pilgrims carrying a strange and powerful new truth. Our people will be studying your history, your art, your emotions for generations to come, Lyra said. You have given us a gift more valuable than any resource or territory. You have given us doubt. The logical certainty that drove us is gone, and in its place is wonder. It is a disorienting feeling. It's the feeling of being alive, Lyra, Eva said, a faint smile on her face. It's messy and unpredictable, but it's where the best parts of us live. Lyra turned her featureless face towards Eva. The pilot, your granddaughter, her sacrifice will be the first story taught to the new generation of Cathar. The story of how a small, illogical being, powered by an emotion we could not measure, taught a galaxy-spanning empire the true meaning of existence. The Cathar had come seeking to impose their cold, sterile order on a chaotic world. They had believed themselves to be the masters of reality, but they had awoken something far older, a fundamental truth that had been hiding in plain sight, that consciousness was not a byproduct of the universe, but a participant in its creation, and that humanity, with its flawed, beautiful, and courageous heart, held a special place in that cosmic symphony. They had not been erased. Instead, they had become the unforgettable note that changed the song forever.